Hello, everybody, and welcome to our ethics session for Fall 1 of 2022. This go round, we're going to be talking a little bit about mindset and strategy. And so you know, some of this is drawn from a book by John Mackey, Steve McIntosh, and Carter Phipps called Conscious Leadership. John Mackey is the CEO of Whole Foods, so if that name sounds familiar, that's probably where you've heard it from. He talks a lot about his own experience, and so as these books go, there's a little bit of it that is personal to him, but really inaccessible to most of us, because we're not working in these bigger Wall Street or corporate level CEO type things. We're working in much smaller arenas. But still, there are principles that we can draw from this and things that can help us as we go. So, many of us think about ethics in terms of how do we respond to a thing. So something happens beyond our control, or a person says something to us, and we have to decide how are we going to react to that. So we do that hopefully with a set of ethical muscles that are built up over the years that we practice, and so we respond in a good way, at least at our best we do. Understand we're all human, but we try to respond at our best to that. But we all also know that ethics is more than just how do we react. It's also got a proactive element to it. How do we create systems that are going to lead to better outcomes for us and the people we work with? Mackey talks about a win-win-win scenario. So it's not just me trying to win the deal. It's not just you winning and me sacrificing myself. It's also the community that we're involved in. We want everyone to win in these things. And you see that for those of you that are in the PCL program. You see churches a lot of times, well, maybe not a lot of times, but you see some really encouraging stories of churches trying to do this, trying to figure out, in the context that we live, how do we do something good for this community? How do we work for a better outcome within this community or for this population, understanding that if it benefits them, then it also benefits us because it helps us accomplish our mission of doing good in the world, and it also probably will lead to people wanting to join in on that because they see that as attractive. So Mackey talks a lot about getting beyond the zero-sum games, and we've heard that term plenty of times. Some of you have probably read Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game that deals along those lines. Also, those are good resources too. Today I want us to think about ethics in a proactive way with a couple of different topics. Now, there's a lot of different directions that we can go with this, and believe me, when I was doing research for this lesson, there was a lot more that I had to leave out that I wished I could have put in, but that's just the nature of the game, right? You can't include everything. So we've got two things that I've included as possible assignments for your course, and your professor may choose one or the other. I want to explain them both because I think both of them open doors into how this might work, this idea of strategy and mindset as ethics. One is a video by Jonathan Thompson. It's called Cathedral Thinking is Dead, Long Live Cathedral Thinking. And he approaches this human project in a way that many of us have heard, but few of us practice. We've heard this idea of cathedral building, because cathedrals in the Middle Ages took generations to build. You would not have begun a cathedral and expected it to be finished in 5 years, which is more or less what the expectation was when Notre Dame caught on fire a few years ago, that the repairs could happen fairly quickly, even though it took decades and maybe even centuries, I haven't looked it up, to finish the original cathedral. So with this expectation of short-term possibilities, we forget that humanity is a long-term project, that it's a cathedral project. And so he talks about that mindset. and about how we lost it along the way, but also how we can regain it, and particularly how we can regain it in terms of what motivates us and what pushes us forward. There's a real ethical component in that, because we don't want to just be thinking about our ethical responsibilities to our neighbors of proximity, to those that are around us, to those that currently share the planet with us. Now, that's a primary need, certainly, and that's a primary ethical call, certainly, but it's not the only one. We also have a responsibility to our neighbors in time, those that will be coming after us, that will inherit whatever we give them. And you can think about this in terms of environmentalism, but you can also think of it in terms of other structures as well, of our current political structure, divided and broken as it is, of our current church structure. I'm a United Methodist. That church is, if not melting down, at least breaking off in a lot of places. Well, what can we do to leave something better for those that will come after us? We engage in that mindset for the long term. What's our ethical responsibility to our neighbors in time? And doing that doesn't require us just to respond, because we can't respond to them yet. They're not here. What it does is it requires us to think strategically about how we're going to approach them. There's a really interesting idea I came across in this. I don't believe it's in that video, but it's the idea of doing a pre-mortem. So we think about when something goes wrong, or when someone dies, or there's a crime, we do an autopsy, we do a post-mortem investigation. Post, after mortem, death, after something's gone, after something's happened, after something's passed. Well, it was John Mackey, now that I think about it. It was John Mackey that proposed this, doing a pre-mortem, saying, okay, before we get there, let's do a thought experiment. Let's imagine ourselves in the future, looking back on the people we are right now, and saying, what would we say about those people? What would we say about their decisions? Not knowing exactly how it's going to turn out, or other factors that are going to come up along the way. The things we know and the things we can control, what's the judgment now? So it's projecting ourselves into the future and looking back to see what can that tell us about where these decisions we make, where these strategies we implement, where these practices we embody, where they might lead us. Thinking about death can help us clarify our lives. David Brooks asked the question, are we living for our resume, or are we living for our eulogy? Are we living for what people will think about us now so that we can advance ourselves or our agendas or our reputation? Or are we thinking about our eulogy, what people will say about us when we're gone? And this cathedral thinking really addresses that second question. Okay? How do we live for our eulogy? How do we do a pre-mortem on our own behavior right now and say, long term, where is this going, and how will people look at it? So that's one possible assignment, and something that is worth thinking about. Even if that is not assigned by your professor, I would recommend watching that video. It's 17 minutes of your life, and it's good stuff. The second is a case study by Bruce Friedrich. Now, I'm going to tell you now, I live in a part of the world where PETA is sort of the boogeyman, right? Bruce Friedrich is a former head of PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So just to get this out there right now, I'm not asking you to adopt his worldview. I'm not asking you to set aside your own convictions. I would ask you to consider those in light of what he presents, but this is not an advocacy video, okay, or at least not from my standpoint. What I'm more interested in is that you look at the principles he puts out and the practice he engages in, particularly in changing his tactic in order to try to get his ethical underpinnings moved toward greater acceptance and practice. Okay, so he looks back and talks at one point in the middle of the video or so, he talks about how for decades environmental activists have said, well, you need to agree with us and you need to change your diet and stop eating meat, or at least eat less meat because of X, Y, and Z, and had all these facts, which are very compelling facts, but it didn't work. That shaming people or encouraging people, none of that worked. That the problem continued to persist. And particularly the problem he identifies is the effect of meat production on our environment, both the use of water, on carbon emissions, and soil degradation, deforestation, all those things together. So if that's not having an impact, if he's not able to convince people, then he thinks, well, okay, what if we changed our strategy and made alternatives available to people? What if we gave them a choice that was not there before? And this is what he's really promoting and advocating in this video. So what I think is helpful for us to do is to think not just about how do we get people to agree with us, how do we make a compelling case, but to think about, okay, if this is what I'm working toward, if this is where I really think that we need to go, how do I offer paths to make that possible? How do I make that more accessible for people? And how do I remove barriers that keep people from adopting what I'm suggesting? So all of these things go into Bruce Friedrich's video and to the questions that we think about our own situations and the barriers that people may face in the things we're working toward. How might we remove those? Or just in general, how might we change our tactics? How might we change our practices in order to move us toward ethical goals? So it's a lot to think about. It always is. That's the point of these lessons. That's kind of the point of ethics in general, to help us live a considered life. Hopefully this will get you started. If you need anything, you are always welcome to email me. It's Eric, ERIC, .vanmeter, VANMETER, at dwu.edu. You're welcome to give me a call at the office or to talk to your professor and get them in touch with me. I'll be glad to discuss, to help, to give insight as I am able. Thanks, everybody. Have a great semester, and I will see you for session 2 in this fall.